Hi everyone, Sarah Barnes Humphrey here of Let's Talk Supply Chain with you from Visibility in Chicago with Mark and Chris. Welcome, how are you?
Good, you?
Doing well.
Good, good, good. Chris, over to you. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah, I'm Chris Bauman. I'm Director of Outbound Transportation at Dollar Tree. I've been with the company about 21 years. Done a little bit of everything in transportation world, bounced back, inbound, outbound, kind of wherever a hole needed plugged. My current role...
Isn't that what supply chain professionals do?
Exactly. My current role focuses on data and analytics systems and financials. So we're big FourKites users and we're here to learn about all the exciting stuff they've got going on.
Yeah, so let's talk about that because you were on stage today and I want to hear all about what you spoke about. And there's my Canadian coming out.
Yeah, so we presented around notifications, and specifically Dollar Tree's got about 17,000 stores, a little bit less than 17,000 stores.
Just a few.
And you know, the truck day is a very challenging day for the stores, and for years it was very difficult for the stores to plan when that truck was going to be there. So in 2018 we partnered with FourKites and we created an app called Where's My Truck, which is basically the FourKites data.
I want that app.
Exactly. So the stores can log in and on their truck day or the day before their truck day, they can see where it's going. So we're really proud of it. So we're sharing it with the other users. There's a lot of retailers here who have a good opportunity to learn from it.
Amazing. I want to know all about it. I want to know the colors. I want to know how it's used. So I definitely have to go and see your presentation. All right. So let's talk about some of the expectations with peak. So I did a poll just the other day and I was like, peak season, are you extremely busy, not so busy? Most people said they were extremely busy. And then I spoke to an economist and he was like, peak season, it depends if it's domestic or international and all that kind of stuff. So let's talk about peak season and over the next 6 to 9 months in retail. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, so, you know, the dollar business and specifically Dollar Tree, right? It's unique. We are a seasonal player. And really every peak is bigger than the previous peak because we open stores every year, right? So our volume goes up every year.
Wow.
You know, with 20 years experience, we've done some, you know, really good economies and some really bad economies. And, you know, Dollar Tree does good in good economies. We do great in bad economies.
Right.
You know, reading what's out there, right? We announced our second quarter earnings a couple weeks ago. So there's, I mean, the press release is out there. Dollar Tree had one of what I thought was a really good quarter from a sales perspective. And you hear it from not just us, but a fair amount of other retailers talking about a mix shift, right? And to me, that's one of those like radar buzzwords that like, if consumers are switching off of discretionary and onto consumables, that tells me something is afoot. I'm not an economist, I can't predict the future, but those are the tea leaves that I try and read when we're talking about what does the next 6 to 9 months hold.
Well, and you mentioned earlier planning is very important for you, especially when you were talking about the app. How do you plan for that kind of volatility, especially going into the holiday season? Yeah,
it's a lot of work. We grow our delivery fleet a large amount, probably 15-20%.
Wow.
We try and get as much ahead of it as we can with communication to our carriers, with plans from our merchants who are honestly a lot more closer connected than we would be to what they're seeing from a sales and inventory perspective. And it gives us a read on the market when we go out to carriers and say, okay, you're at 50 trucks, I'm gonna need you to be at 60 for peak.
Right.
If you get an answer like, no problem, sure, we're gonna be okay. If you get the answer of, well, that's gonna be a problem, that's kind of a read on the freight market as well.
Yeah, and we've been seeing that, I think, a little bit recently anyways. So let's talk about retail trends, labor, inventory management, customer loyalty. Mark, talk to us about that. What are you hearing from your customers about these trends?
So all you have to do to a C-level executive, a lot of whom are here in the building with us today, is mention the word labor and they just groan. Right? It's just an audible groan, right? Yeah. Because, and I was at dinner last night with a few folks from EMEA as well, Europe, and they were saying it's the same way over there as well.
Wow.
They just cannot get labor. So, and also it's a retention issue too, right?
Yeah,
So,
it is.
if a retailer or a manufacturer, it doesn't matter, right? But if a retailer brings in new labor, right, trains them up, and then they turn around and leave 4 or 6 months later, that's a waste of investment, right?
Yeah.
So it's a really hard time hanging on to that staff. And what we try to do at FourKites is try to make the actual associate's job a little bit easier by being equipped with more data.
Right.
So they know when the truck is going to arrive, so they can have a conversation with the customer, which is intelligent and fact-driven versus just, well, I think it's going to come in 3 hours, don't know, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned customer loyalty. You know, COVID drove a truck through it, right? Because
Yeah.
if you think about just us as consumers, we all shopped retailers and shopped brands that we probably never shopped before.
That's
right?
very true.
Right. And so what happened was all that loyalty that was built up over years, and retailers spent a lot of time, money, and effort, you know, investing in. All of a sudden, it's almost like a reset button got hit, right? And then there's the Amazon effect, which is what I call it, right? We have all gotten as human beings to the point where we expect everything within 24 to 48 hours.
Right.
Now, do I need golf balls in 24 hours? Probably not, right? It's pretty cool that they can show up that quick, right? You know, because I can be really lazy and not think about it until the day of, right? But I really don't need that in my life. I must be a terrible planner, right? So, but those are the trends that retailers are dealing with, and it's really hard because customers have now figured out, oh, you know what? That brand is just like that brand, right? Private label is a great example. You know, in a down economy, you see a lot of consumers trade down to private label. But the funny thing is, most manufacturers have one line for their branded product and one line for their private label. And guess what? Here's the big secret. It's the same product, right? So at the end of the day, they're just labeling it differently, and they're trying to think, okay, well, so if it's a really pretty label, you're going to spend $2 more, whatever the case may be. If it's a sort of label, but you know what? If it's the same stuff, and most consumers are smart enough to have figured that out, it's like, you know what? In a down economy, I'll buy that.
Yeah, going back to your golf balls, though, I think it depends who you're going to go play golf
I don't know why the
against.
example. I don't know why that example resonates with you. Okay, but that's fine.
If you're going to play golf with some competitive buddies, you may want that customized golf ball within 24 hours
True.
to make sure you have it for
True.
that game.
Yeah.
Right?
Probably could have used another example, but that's fine. We'll go with that.
That was
It's all
a
good.
great
It's all good.
example. It was
Right,
really great.
right.
All right, keeping on to retail trends then, Chris, talk to us about labor from your perspective and then also inventory management.
Yeah. So labor, I view labor kind of two ways. One, being the transportation professional, right? When I think labor, how it affects me more than anything, I think truck drivers. Now, we don't have our own fleet, but the driving industry is so short on labor. And Dollar Tree has a hard delivery model, as I talked about in my presentation. I mean, it is one of the most challenging deliveries out there from a driver perspective. So finding drivers that can do it is a challenge. It's something we worry about every day. And then the other big thing is the stores. Truck day is the day they get the most labor assigned to them, but it's the store managers sometimes have to worry, are they gonna show up? Right? Hey, I scheduled a staff of 5 to come unload the truck. Well, 3 showed up, 2 didn't.
Yeah, and I've seen those commercial invoices for a dollar store. Like the amount of SKUs and the list of products that are in just an ocean freight container, I could only imagine from a truck. And having to take that off and then putting it into inventory or even on the shelves is a very big job.
It is. It's very intensive. It's labor intensive, and it's one thing you look at, right? As the cost of labor has gone up, you just always have to look at: is there a better mousetrap? Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. But you're not doing your job if you're not looking. Labor used to be 7.25.
Yeah, and how are you managing all of those SKUs in inventory? Let's talk about that as well, because there's a lot.
There is a lot. Our DCs, we know what we're getting right now. Our first distribution center, when I started with the company, it's right behind our corporate office, and I was told when we started, we built it for 1,800 SKUs because we're never going to need more than that. We surpassed that before I even started, right? And it's a challenge, but it's one they work every day. A lot of our stuff, we say we have distribution centers, not warehouses. We have some product that is everyday product. It's in the warehouse all the time, but the bulk of our stuff is in and out, right? It's seasonal based. We get a great buy. We buy 10 truckloads of it. It comes into the warehouse, they check it in, it turns around, goes right out the door,
Right.
and it's not taking up any more space. So the SKU count is very high, and at the store level, the SKU count is even higher
Right.
in a lot of cases. But it's a challenge that I'm glad I'm not a DC operator. Let's just put it that way.
Well, thank you for those insights. So, Mark,
Yep.
talk to me about investment in technology. What does that look like right now?
Yep.
What are some of the barriers that are coming up to investing in technology right now?
So there's a lot of buzz around automation right now, and there's
Well,
automation is a very
labor.
right,
Yeah.
right, but that's a very broad term. Automation. It's sort of like throwing out the term AI or ML.
Okay.
Right. If you go
Okay.
to NRF, every booth talks about AI and ML.
Right.
Very few of them, if you walked into the booth, has someone in the booth who can actually talk about that.
Right.
But from an automation standpoint, it's a challenge. If you're a retailer, you got to figure out how to make the most of your budget, right? But the fact of the matter is, one way or the other, automation is here to stay,
Right.
Because the labor market continues to decline. The population rate, I mean, this is sort of the missing number that people don't focus on. Forget about the labor as a result of COVID and all this kind of stuff. If you just look at the population birth rate,
Yeah.
right? So, my wife is one of 5. How many families do you know today having 5 kids?
Nope.
Very few, if any, right? So
That's a lot.
Right. So the available labor pool, even without all the nonsense that we've been through for the last couple of years, is dwindling. So one way or the other, a retailer or a manufacturer has to do some form of automation. The question is, it's such an exploding market right now. Which technology do you focus on? Do
Yeah.
you focus on micro-fulfillment? I mean, Target's very public about their sortation centers, right? So there's automation in the background for those, for us to get products quickly, and the Amazon effect that we talked about before. But if you're a retailer or a manufacturer trying to make those investments, and you got to go to your CFO and make the business case, it's really tough because there's so many players out there now. That whole market is going to consolidate over the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
So if you place your bet with the wrong automation provider, you're
Right.
going to be having a really tough talk with your CFO in 3
Wow.
years. So, but I do think there's a lot more sort of piloting that's going on that we're not even aware of.
Yeah.
Almost every retailer I talk to has some flavor of automation, either already up and running or piloting.
Piloting.
And I think there's this misnomer out here, and a couple of people talked about it on the main stage this morning. There's this sort of sentiment out there that automation is going to replace jobs. It's not going to replace jobs. Right?
We don't have the
Right.
labor force
We don't have the labor to begin
anyways.
with. And the fact of the matter is, I was just in a facility that leverages what I call cobots, right? So the idea is these cobots are following people around.
Right.
And they're doing all the heavy lifting, right? So all that has to happen is the person that's actually working in the aisle doing the picking, all they have to do is pick the thing from here to here, and the
Right.
robot just follows them along. So what happens? Back injuries decrease, right?
Yeah.
Retention levels increase because now these are happier employees that are being utilized better,
Yeah.
so they stay with the company. So it's a win-win, and it's certainly not getting rid of jobs in any respect.
Yeah, so being very careful as to who you're partnering with
Right,
on a
exactly.
technology perspective,
Yep.
what's going to enhance and empower your labor force.
Exactly.
So, Chris, I want to end with you. When we look at, maybe the next 6 to 12 months, maybe even holiday season coming up, what advice do you have for supply chain professionals right now? What should they be taking action on? Maybe there's some questions they should be asking themselves. Like what are you and your team sort of asking yourselves?
Yeah, so we're focusing right now on building our carrier partnerships. The freight market is not what it was for the last 3 years
Sure.
right now.
Yeah.
And really evaluating the carriers that have stood by you and that did what they said they were going to do, and carriers that didn't, and evaluating that and making those decisions now and partnering, like the automation conversation, partnering with the right people who will be there for the long run.
Yeah.
Because maybe in 6 months, it may be soft and you may be able to get a slightly better rate on freight, but as soon as it turns, some guys are going to walk away.
Yeah, well,
and
I'm
you don't
thinking
want to
for
be
the
there.
long term.
Exactly.
Right? That's kind of short-sighted. We want to look for the long term. We want to establish those relationships, nurture those relationships, partner with
Exactly.
others as well. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mark and
welcome.
Chris, for joining me at Visibility 2023.